We are going to be covering data annotations in quite a bit more depth than we have in previous weeks. Uh, we've worked a little bit with them, and we are going to be expanding on that. So by the end of this unit, you will know how to add quite a few more annotations that will help you validate data. You'll be learning how to add data annotations that will alter the database schema. You will also be learning more about adding data annotations to controllers. And again, we're going to be covering in a lot more depth the annotations that you add to models. And what are data annotations? So this is the code that you add in brackets. In the model, you will add the bracketed code above the properties. And in models, they are used to ensure that the data that you are adding is as accurate as possible. So we use them for accuracy. In the model, you can also use data annotations to adjust how the properties are displayed in your views. You can adjust the actual name of the column or table that is generated through code first. In fact, your data annotations will override the code first defaults. You will also be seeing how we add the annotations to controllers. Okay, so we're going to be kind of reviewing things you know, but covering a whole lot of things that you haven't learned yet. So let's just move on. When you use data annotations, you have to remember to add using system component model data annotations to the top of your controller or your model. And if you are going to be using data annotations that are going to change the schema, and these would be annotations such as the actual name of the column or the name of your table, then you have to add a little different using statement. You have to basically add .schema onto the end because those schema-related data annotations are a little bit different than the regular ones. So we are going to take a look at both the annotations that we use in our models and our controllers. First, we're going to take a look at some of the data annotations that we use in controllers. And there are 3 different types of action selector annotations. We have action name, non-action, and action verbs. Action name allows you to override the method name and use it as a different action name instead. So in brackets, you have the keyword action name, and then in parentheses and double quotes, you have the new name that you want to use. So in the little example below, the action method name is called get current time, but if we would like routing to use current time instead, we don't want to include the word get, we can change the action name. Okay, and if you do that, then all the routing should use current time instead of get current time. In this little example, we've got, it's a post method on delete confirmed. So delete confirmed is the action method. Okay, and this is a post, which means that they've already seen the deletion screen and they've clicked on the delete button. So they've indicated that they want to delete, and now we're going to show them that it has in fact been deleted. And so instead of having them route using delete confirmed, we are going to just use the word delete instead. Okay, and so that's the only thing that has changed here. Once they have clicked on the delete button, it's going to come through here, and basically it tries to find the ID. Okay, and then we end up deleting or removing that row based on the ID, and we save the changes, and then it does a little redirect to it looks like it's going to our index, which is kind of our summary screen. And you guys maybe were wondering what validate anti-forgery token does. This is one of the ways that we prevent hacking. And specifically, it is the cross-site request forgery attacks that we are preventing. So non-action. If you have an action method that you do not want people to directly access through the URL. So this would be an action method that's used internally by your app. You can add non-action above it. So in this little example, we've got an action name. So instead of routing with get current time, we're going to route with current time. And then you'll notice that what it's returning is basically a method call to time string. So here's time string. And then it's returning basically this little string with the date time in it. And you'll notice it's a non-action method. So the only time that this little method is going to be called is in an instance like this, when there's another method that's calling it. So the action verbs, we actually have been using some of them. HTTP get and HTTP post are action verbs. And those are the two that we've been primarily using, which we use for a form that they have to fill in. And usually that's on the create. So that would be the get. And then if they want to edit, then, and we're going to use the exact same view, then we may use a post. Okay, so here you can see that the view is going to be inquiry form. And here it is the same view. Okay, so get is what you do when you want an empty form, and post is what you do if there's data there already. You can see we've got the data. Contact would be a class or a table, and then model would be our object. And the object would contain all of the data the form needs. And here we've got posted equal true, and we are passing it the model onto the view. So in a case like this, in the view, it will have to know if it is going to post an empty form or if it's going to need to fill in data. And that is what viewBag posted does. Here it's saying true, So that means, yep, you're going to fill in data. Here, view big posted as false. That means display the empty form. Okay, and here's just another little example showing you something similar. Okay, so here we've got edit. And here we're basing it on ID. And this would be the very first ID that matches. And then we pass the object. And here is where they would actually have made some changes, confirmed it. Okay, and that's when they would come through post. We'd have code in here to update the database, and then it redirects to our index screen, which is a summary. So most often you guys are going to be using get and post. Get is the default. There are other action verbs that you can use, although honestly, it's probably pretty rare. But you can see that we do have a put, delete, and patch, in addition to options. Like I said, these are actually pretty rare. So the difference between put and post. Put is used when you want to update at a very specific location. Okay, and so it's not as flexible as post. And in what we're going to be coding, you guys are going to definitely be using post. Model binding. So this is where you connect the model to the data. It makes it a lot easier for us to work with forms then, because when we are connecting the data in the form to a model, we can use all of the attributes that are in the model to make sure the data is accurate. And we use information from the model for displaying our field names and that type of thing. Okay, so that process is called model binding. You can also bind primitive values, which are values that are input parameters. So if on the URL you are keying in like an ID number, or maybe you have a view passing an ID back to a controller or anything like that, you can actually assign a name to that value, in a sense, binding it. And we've done this already. So when we want to display the details about anything that we see in a summary or an index, we have to use the ID. And so the ID may or may not be there. So we make it nullable. If it is null, then we return not found. But if it is there, then we actually retrieve that database record. And again, if the record is not found, okay, so we've got our object here that's going to store, in this case, the artist's record. If it's null, that means it wasn't found. Otherwise, we are passing that artist record to the view. In a case where we might have multiple parameters, you can have multiple named parameters in your parameter list, as this example shows, and then you can operate on those parameters. So here we've got ID and name. And you can see we've got ID and we have name. So we've seen how to bind to primitive data types, and we've actually worked with complex data types like objects already. So this is kind of a little review, but if we had a student class, and here's a standard class, and you can see they're related. Okay, so we've got the foreign key here. And you may notice there's a couple different ways that you can specify foreign keys. We could have done, in addition to the class, as our data type, we could have also added standard ID to this. If you do a foreign key with just the class, it will automatically generate this value, this property in student, so it can do the connection. You're just letting all the defaults kind of take place. So here is our class. And then in our controller, now we're taking a look at our edit action method. You can see that we have our student class, and the object that we're passing in is standard. And so then we are taking the ID from that object and we're storing it. We're taking the name and we're storing it, and we're taking the age and we're storing that. And because we have related data, it is actually grabbing the standard name and storing that. We've got some code to update the database, and then we are redirecting to our index view. Okay, and so here's like a little graphical example that shows when we are editing. This is what the edit screen looks like, where we've got name, standard name, and age. We save that. Then that's where the post comes into play. And so you can see the object comes in, we're filling in the data, update database, and redirect. The bind attribute is used in controllers to include specific properties that you want to either include or exclude from binding. Okay, so if you don't want all of the properties that are in the class, you can use bind. So again, this is that same student and standard class that we were looking at earlier. And then we've got edit, and this is our post. Okay, so we're editing, and we're going to include the ID and the standard name. Those are the two things that we are including. And we're going to refer to them using std, which is the name of our object. Okay, and so then if we know to include those, they're definitely going to be there, so we can do something with ID and name. So not only can you include, but you can exclude. So if you say bind exclude age, then you would not have access to age in your edit action method. Now, I have had students get messed up using include because they didn't include all of the properties that they were using. So I would be kind of wary of using include or exclude. I would only use them if you have a specific reason for using them. I wouldn't just throw them in and use them because you can. So I would do it if there was a reason to do it. So as we've just seen, model binding will convert request to values. And we can use it on primitives, which would be the parameters that are entered in the URL or perhaps passed from a view. And we can also use it with complex objects. So model binding itself is a two-step process. It's going to collect values from the HTTP request that is coming in and the primitive or the complex type. So basically your variable or your object is populated with those values. Okay, so it collects the values and it populates them. Okay, so we've got our request, and this is where we're collecting them. So whether it's from the URL or from an existing form, collecting those values, binding them to the appropriate variables or classes, and then we can do something with that data. So model state is something that we haven't really talked about all that much, but you do see it in the controllers when it is going to update the database. So how this relates to data annotations is that if there's an error, so you have all of these data annotations in the model to ensure that your data is accurate. And if the user miskeys something, then it flags an error because your data annotation, which are your rules, don't match what the user keyed. So that becomes what's called an error state. Okay. And so when it goes back to the controller, if there is an error, we don't want to update the database. Okay. And so that is what the model state is checking. So model state dot is valid means there are no errors. So in this little example, we had a form that they were filling in and we submitted it. Okay. And so as long as there's no errors, okay, the model state is valid. And then we can save changes to the database. So we basically are going to add the row or the record. We're going to save it, and then we redirect to the index view. Okay, if this is false, okay, so if it's not valid, that means there's errors. So then we return them to that same screen they were at, passing back the data that they had entered. Okay, and so here is just a little different example. Again, it kind of works the same way. It's an edit. And we want to bring in specifically the artist ID and the name. And so if the ID, okay, so this would be the parameter ID, doesn't equal the ID of the artist, okay, then we can't find the record. Okay, otherwise, we check to make sure the model is valid, which means that we did find it. Okay, we found the artist that they wanted to edit, and they did something in the form and they submitted it. Okay, so if there's no errors, then we're going to update the artist and save the changes. Okay, and then if there are any problems doing that update, we're going to assume it's a concurrency exception, which basically means that somebody else is trying to update that exact same data at the same time. So if we no longer have the artist ID, we're going to return not found. Otherwise, we are just throwing an error. right? Assuming that we were able to update, then we redirect. Okay, so that's what all of this is doing. And that's only if there was no errors. Okay. If there were errors, then you can see that we are returning to that artist or whatever, that edit view, and we're passing all of the artist data along.